Have you ever felt like you were on the edge, staring into a vast emptiness where everything you've been taught about survival doesn't matter anymore? What would you do if your world came crashing down, leaving you with nothing but your own strength to survive? How far could you go to fight for your life, to defy the odds stacked against you? And if someone reached out to help, would you trust them, or would you keep fighting alone? What if you were forced to make a choice between two paths, one that offers safety and one that leads to the unknown? Are you curious yet? Because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when you make a choice to stand up, to rise, even when the world has turned its back on you. Join me as we explore the mystery behind a journey that will test the very limits of strength, survival, and the bonds we form in the toughest of times. Ready to find out what happens next? Let's dive into this story together. I was left to die. The desert stretched out in front of me, endless and unforgiving. The sun beat down like a punishment, my throat dry, my body shaking. My wrists were raw from the ropes that had been tight around them too long, and my lips were cracked from thirst. It had started out as hope. Samuel Crenshaw promised me freedom. He promised me escape from the marriage I didn't want, a new life in the next town over. I believed him, trusted him. But that was before he grabbed my wrists, before his smile turned cold and vicious. He didn't want to help me. He wanted control. And when I refused, when I said no, that's when everything changed. The ropes around my wrists tightened, the smile disappeared from his face, and I was left there, alone. I screamed until my voice gave out, pulled against the ropes until my skin bled. But no one came. The vultures circled above me, waiting for their turn. I could feel death closing in. Every breath I took was a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder of how much longer I had to live. It was over, or so I thought. But I didn't die. Something changed in the wind. The air grew heavier, and I felt a shadow fall across my face. I opened my eyes expecting to see vultures, but instead I saw him, an Apache chief, standing over me. His face was rough with age and wisdom, his dark eyes deep with something I couldn't understand. He was bleeding, but he knelt down beside me. "I'm Ayana," he said softly, "and I'm here to take you home." I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. I didn't expect to survive. I didn't expect to be carried out of the desert by a man who looked like death itself. The heat, the pain, and the betrayal. It all seemed to have drained the last bit of fight out of me. I was ready to surrender to the desert, to let it take me, to finally rest. But then, Ayana found me. He didn't say much. His eyes were calm, but I saw the weight in them. He didn't speak to me in the way Samuel had, all sweet promises and lies. Ayana just looked at me with the understanding of someone who had known pain, someone who had known what it felt like to be left behind. His hands worked quickly to untie the ropes, and I felt relief flood my body. It wasn't just the physical relief, though my skin screamed in thanks. It was something else, something I couldn't put into words. When he lifted me in his arms, it was as though I had been reborn. His strength, steady and unwavering, seeped into me, filling the emptiness that had nearly consumed me. His touch didn't feel like a stranger's. It felt like something I hadn't known I needed. Safety, protection. I wasn't alone anymore. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I tried to answer, but the words stuck in my throat. My legs felt like they might give way, but I managed to nod. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. The desert had drained me of everything. The heat, the exhaustion, the fear. It had all stripped me down to nothing. Enjoying the ride? Comment with ready, and subscribe to join the adventure ahead. Ayana didn't hesitate. He simply lifted me again, carrying me toward his horse. Every step was painful for him. His wound was deep, and I could feel his body tense every time he moved, but he didn't complain. He didn't stop. I had seen men suffer and complain, seen them beg for mercy, but this man? He carried me without a word, without hesitation. "There are riders coming," Ayana muttered, scanning the horizon. "We don't have much time." The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, growing closer. I didn't know who they were, but I could feel the danger. Ayana's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowed. He knew what was coming, and I knew that he would protect me with everything he had left. But I was scared, not for myself, not anymore, but for him. His wound was bad. He was already bleeding again. I could see the way his breath caught when he moved, the way he clenched his jaw to keep from showing the pain. He was running on empty. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from thirst. "Riders from town," he replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They think you're my prisoner." A chill ran down my spine. The thought of going back to them, back to the men who had abandoned me, who had used me, was unbearable. But there was no escaping, no running, not in the desert, not with Ayana's wound slowing him down. We couldn't fight them off. We couldn't outrun them. "They'll come for me," I said, my heart sinking in my chest. They'll think you're my prize," Ayana finished for me. "But you're not. They're wrong." I looked at him then, really looked at him. His face, weathered and tired, was still strong. There was no fear in his eyes, just a quiet resolve that cut deeper than any weapon ever could. I had seen violence before. I had felt it. The way it ate at your soul, the way it changed you, left you empty. But with Ayana, there was something different. Something that spoke of honor, of dignity, of survival, without the need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to show strength, he just was strong. The riders were getting closer, the sound of hooves thundering through the air. "Stay close," Ayana said, his voice low. "Don't make a sound unless you have to." I nodded, my body pressed against his as he led the horse forward, slowly, cautiously. There was no escape, not without a fight, but there was no fight we could win without more help. The riders were closing in too fast. I could hear their voices now, calling out. They'd come for me. I felt a pang of shame in my chest. Would they believe me? Would they understand what Samuel had done? Or would they just see a girl who had been abandoned, left to die in the desert, now caught up in a war between two worlds? I wasn't sure what to expect when they arrived. I wasn't sure if I'd even get the chance to explain myself before they dragged me back to town. I wasn't sure if Ayana would survive the fight, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to that life. I wasn't going back to the men who had tried to break me. When the riders finally emerged from the heat, I could see their faces. Samuel, Dutch, Marcus. They looked at me with contempt, like they always had, but there was something different now. Something in the way their eyes flickered nervously to Ayana, the man they had underestimated. "Looks like we found the savage," Samuel said, his voice laced with mockery. "You can't just steal what doesn't belong to you." Ayana didn't flinch. His hand moved to the knife at his belt, and I saw the tension in his muscles. "I'm not stealing anything," Ayana said, his voice steady and calm. "But you're going to have to explain why you left her to die." Samuel sneered, stepping closer. "You think you can protect her?" he said. "You think they'll believe a savage over me?" Ayana didn't answer him. His dark eyes flicked to me for a split second before returning to Samuel. He was waiting for them to make the first move. In that moment, I knew something. I knew that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I wasn't just the girl they had left behind in the desert. I was more than that. And Ayana, he had made me believe it. The horses shifted beneath us as the riders closed in, the tension rising. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew that, whatever came, I wouldn't be standing alone. The desert heat wasn't kind to anyone, but it was especially cruel to those who were already broken. I could feel the heat licking at my skin, the sweat trickling down my neck, but it wasn't the sun that had me trembling. It was the cold fear that settled deep in my bones. The riders closed in on us, and I could feel the tension in Ayana's body. His strength, which had once felt like a comforting shield, now felt like a taut bowstring ready to snap. He was waiting for them to make their move. His hand was on the knife at his belt, the grip steady, his eyes narrowed, watching each of them like a hawk. I wanted to tell him to run, to leave me behind. The weight of my past was too much. I knew what would happen to us if we stayed. These men didn't play by any rules. But when I looked at Ayana, standing there with his shoulders squared and his gaze unflinching, I realized that running wasn't an option anymore. I had been running for too long. Running from the men who had hurt me, running from the shame that came with being abandoned, running from a life that had never seen me for who I truly was. But Ayana was different. He didn't see me as a broken thing. He didn't see me as a helpless victim. He saw me for the strength I had left in me, and that gave me the courage to stand. Samuel, Crenshaw, Dutch, and Marcus rode forward, their eyes sharp, their horses snorting impatiently. They were predators, circling their prey, but they didn't know that the prey had teeth now. Well, Samuel said, his voice thick with mockery. Look at what we've got here. A little Apache savage thinking he can just take what he wants. Ayana didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, his presence enough to silence them, even if only for a moment. I could see the fire in his eyes, the power in the quiet, but they didn't know him like I did. They didn't understand that he was more than just a warrior. I didn't take anything, Ayana said finally, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made them stop in their tracks. But you'll answer for what you did to her. Samuel's face twisted with fury. You think anyone will believe your word over mine? He sneered, glancing at Dutch and Marcus. You think anyone will listen to the words of a savage? I saw the way his eyes flicked to me, and the way his smirk faded into something darker. She's nothing but trouble, just like the rest of your kind, and now you're going to pay for it. His words hit me like a slap. He had no idea what I'd been through, no understanding of how much I had suffered, and now, here he was, about to take everything from me again, simply because he could. But I wasn't the same girl who had been left to die in the desert. I stepped forward, my legs shaking but my heart steady. You don't get to decide. Samuel stopped short. His eyes flicked to me, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in them. He didn't expect me to speak, didn't expect me to stand up to him. You think your words matter? He sneered, but there was a tremor in his voice now. He wasn't as sure of himself as he had been before. You're nothing, just a little orphan girl who doesn't know her place, and you, he pointed at Ayana, you're just an animal. I could feel Ayana's muscles tense beside me, and I knew he was ready to move, but he didn't. He stood still, his hand steady on the knife at his side. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a leader. Someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was hold your ground, even when it seemed like everything was stacked against you. Your words don't matter either, Samuel, Ayana said softly, but his voice carried. What you did to her, what you did to me, will not go unpunished. I saw it then, the shift, the understanding, the moment when Samuel realized that he wasn't the one in control anymore. It wasn't just Ayana, it was me too. I had power, I had a voice, and I wasn't going to let him take that from me. You've hurt too many people, I said, my voice clear now, steady, and you'll pay for it. I won't let you hurt anyone else. For a moment, Samuel said nothing. He just stared at me, the anger in his eyes swirling with something else, something like fear. He had no idea how to handle a woman who wouldn't break. He thought he could intimidate me, control me, but I was done with that. The air around us felt thick, heavy with tension. I could hear the distant sound of more hooves, the cavalry riding in from town, but it was too late. We were already at a crossroads, and no matter what Samuel did next, I wasn't going to let him win. You think they'll help you? Samuel spat, glancing toward the cavalry. They'll believe me. I'm the one they trust. I could feel the weight of his words, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had already made my choice, and I wasn't going to let him twist my fate any longer. Before he could say another word, Ayana stepped forward, his voice low and steady. You're wrong, he said, his eyes locked onto Samuel's. The truth is already here. You are nothing, and you will pay for what you did. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear that had held me back for so long, the shame, the doubt, it all fell away. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just a girl left to die in the desert. I was someone who had been given a chance, and I would take it no matter the cost. Make them believe me, I said, my voice growing stronger. Make them see me for who I am. I wasn't just standing for myself anymore. I was standing for every woman, every person who had ever been ignored, belittled, cast aside. I was ready to fight for my place in this world. The air felt different now. The tension was so thick it hung in the desert heat like a suffocating blanket. Samuel and his men had circled us, their eyes filled with cruelty and malice. I could feel their hate, their judgment, and it made my skin crawl, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Ayana stood beside me as calm as ever, his presence steady, like the mountains themselves. His hand rested on the knife at his belt, but there was something more in his eyes. Something that told me he wasn't afraid of death, not when it came for him. The riders were close now, only a few yards away. I could hear their horses snorting, their boots kicking up dust. But it wasn't the noise that filled my mind. It was the way they looked at me. like I was nothing more than a prize to be claimed, a possession to be taken, the same way Samuel had always looked at me. The sound of hooves grew louder, and for the first time, I felt a surge of power run through me. I wasn't the helpless girl tied to that tree anymore. I was a woman who had survived, who had fought for her life, and who was ready to face whatever came next. I was done being the victim. Samuel called out, his voice dripping with venom. "Well, well, if it isn't the savage trying to steal my woman." He sneered, his hand resting on his gun. Ayana didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, unwavering. "She's not your woman," he said, his voice low and firm. "You have no claim over her." Samuel's face twisted in anger, and I saw the fire ignite in his eyes. He had underestimated Ayana, but now he was realizing his mistake. He thought he could control everything, but he didn't know the kind of strength that lived inside Ayana. "I don't care what you think," Samuel spat, his eyes narrowing. "You're just an animal. You can't take what doesn't belong to you." I felt the heat rise in my chest. What doesn't belong to me? I had lived my life feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, but in that moment with Ayana beside me, I knew something had changed. I wasn't some helpless girl anymore, and I sure as hell wasn't Samuel's property, not anymore. "I don't belong to anyone," I said, my voice stronger than it had ever been. "Not to you, not to anyone. I decide my own fate now." Samuel sneered at me, clearly taken aback. He wasn't used to women speaking back, especially not a woman like me. A woman who had been left to die in the desert, only to come back stronger than before. "You're right about one thing," Ayana said, his voice calm, but the weight behind his words was unmistakable. "You don't belong to him, and neither does she." He looked at Samuel then, his eyes dark with the knowledge of how many times men like him had used women like me. His jaw tightened, and I knew he wasn't just speaking to Samuel anymore. He was speaking to all the men who had ever tried to control someone else's fate. "I've killed more men than you've ever met," Ayana said quietly, his voice sharp and clear. "And I don't take kindly to people who hurt others for their own gain." Samuel's face turned pale, and I could see the fear flicker in his eyes. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't in control, that the world he had built, the world where he was the master, was about to crumble. But then Samuel did something I didn't expect, something desperate. He reached for his gun, his fingers trembling, his face a twisted mask of panic and anger. Ayana moved faster than I could blink, his hand already on his knife. The flick of the blade was like lightning, quick and deadly, and before Samuel could even bring his gun to bear, Ayana had already disarmed him. The knife dug into the wood of the gun barrel, and Samuel's weapon fell to the ground with a sickening clatter. "You're outmatched," Ayana said, his voice cold. "And you're out of time." The other two riders, Dutch and Marcus, had backed away slightly, clearly sensing the shift in the air. Their hands hovered near their guns, but they were unsure now. They didn't know who to trust anymore. They had come to the desert expecting to take what they wanted, but now they saw what true strength looked like, and it wasn't the kind they could buy. "I won't let you hurt her," Ayana continued, his eyes locked on Samuel, whose face was twisted with rage and fear. "You'll answer for what you've done, but not today." The sounds of more horses filled the air, and I realized that Ayana's people were coming. I didn't know how many, but I knew it didn't matter. The cavalry had arrived, not for a battle, but for something far more dangerous. "Get on your horses," Ayana said, turning to me. "We need to move." I didn't hesitate. I didn't question him. I climbed onto his horse, my hands still shaking, but my resolve hardening. I was ready for this, ready to face whatever came next. The riders weren't going to stop. They weren't going to let go of their hatred so easily, but neither was I. We rode out of the desert, the sound of hooves echoing around us, and behind us, I knew the world was changing. I wasn't just running anymore. I was fighting for my life, for my right to live, and I would fight for it as long as it took. The desert was quiet, save for the sound of hooves drumming against the earth beneath us. Ayana's horse moved steadily, the rhythm of its steps in sync with my racing heart. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. We rode together, side by side, but the distance between us was more than just physical. He was a warrior, a man who had seen more bloodshed than I could ever imagine, and I was, Well, I was still trying to figure out what I was. I had been a girl left to die in the desert, but now, riding with Ayana, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first met him. Something inside me had shifted. The fear, the shame, the helplessness, I had buried it deep. And now, all I had was the burning need to survive. But that wasn't all. As we rode further away from the danger, my thoughts went back to those men, Samuel, Dutch, and Marcus. They had left me for dead. I had trusted Samuel once. I had believed his lies, thinking he was offering me freedom, only to find out that his idea of freedom was shackles and chains. And yet, somehow, even after all that had happened, my mind couldn't escape one question. What would I have done if Ayana hadn't found me? Would I still be lying there in the desert waiting for death to take me? Or would I have found a way to survive, to escape? My thoughts were interrupted as Ayana spoke, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "We have to keep moving. The soldiers will be on us soon." I nodded, but my thoughts were still racing. The danger hadn't passed. It had only just begun. Samuel wasn't done with me. He wouldn't stop until he had me back in his control. The men who had come after me would do anything to get their hands on me again. I looked at Ayana, trying to read him, trying to understand what he was thinking. He was a man of few words, but there was something about the way he carried himself, his posture, the way his hand rested on his knife, the calm in his eyes. It spoke of someone who was prepared for anything. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. "They'll come for you," Ayana said, his eyes never leaving the path ahead. "But we can't outrun them forever." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, but I spoke anyway. "What do we do then?" He didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, swirling sand around us. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Finally, Ayana spoke, his voice gruff but steady. "We fight." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I had fought in my own way before. I had fought to survive, to protect myself. But this was different. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Ayana, too. It was about the Apache people, about the land that belonged to them long before any of us arrived. I didn't know how to fight like Ayana fought. I didn't know the ways of war. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to die without a fight. As we approached the ridge, I could see the dust rising in the distance. The soldiers. They were coming, and they were coming fast. Ayana's grip on the reins tightened, his jaw set with determination. "I'll hold them off as long as I can," Ayana said, his voice steady but sharp. "You need to run." "No!" The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it. "I'm not running anymore." Ayana glanced at me, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not ready to fight." "I don't have a choice." I met his gaze, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "Neither do you." He said nothing for a moment, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. But in the end, he didn't argue. He didn't need to. We both knew what was at stake. We had reached the ridge now. The soldiers were closer, their horses kicking up dust as they rode towards us. I could make out their figures. 5, maybe 6 of them, their guns raised. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take us down. Ayana stopped, his horse jerking to a halt. The soldiers were close enough now that I could see the hate in their eyes, the kind of hate that only came from years of prejudice, years of fear and misunderstanding. I felt a chill run through me as I saw the first of them dismount, his hand on his rifle. But Ayana didn't move. He stood tall, his eyes locked on the soldiers, his body coiled with tension. "This is the end, isn't it?" I whispered. Ayana's gaze softened, just a fraction. "No, it's only the beginning." With a sharp motion, Ayana dismounted and stood before me, positioning himself between me and the approaching soldiers. The tension in the air was palpable. It was a standoff, and we had no backup. The soldiers circled us, their weapons drawn. "This is your last chance," the leader called out, his voice rough. "Come with us quietly, or we'll take you by force." Ayana didn't flinch. "You'll have to take me first." I could see it now. The calm, unyielding strength in Ayana. He wasn't afraid, not of them, not of death. And in that moment, I knew that I wasn't alone. The soldiers hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had come expecting an easy victory. They had come expecting to take a woman who had been abandoned, broken, but they didn't know Ayana, and they didn't know me. A gunshot rang out and everything moved in slow motion. But it wasn't Ayana who fired. It was the warriors on the ridge, their rifles trained on the soldiers below. The soldiers scattered, taking cover, but it was too late. Ayana's warriors had already circled in on them, their shots precise and deadly. The soldiers were outnumbered now. They were retreating, pulling back toward their horses, their faces pale with fear. Ayana's warriors didn't move. They stood their ground, their guns still raised, watching as the soldiers retreated. I could feel the adrenaline rush through me. We had won, for now, at least. Ayana turned to me, his face grim but resolute. "This isn't over." I nodded, my heart still racing. "I know." We had survived, but the real battle was still ahead of us. The dust hung heavy in the air, swirling around us as the last of the soldiers disappeared into the distance. Ayana and I stood in the aftermath, the world around us still, but our hearts racing with the knowledge that this was only a brief moment of peace. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the desert. I could feel the heat of the day lingering, but there was a chill in the air now. A chill that wasn't just from the evening breeze. It was the weight of everything that had happened. The danger, the violence, the choices we had made. I glanced at Ayana. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched, but his eyes were calm, like the still waters of a lake before a storm. He hadn't flinched when the soldiers had circled us, hadn't hesitated when they'd made their threats. He had stood firm, not just for himself, but for me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was alone. We didn't speak for a while. The silence between us was comfortable, but it was heavy with the things left unsaid. I wanted to thank him, to tell him how much he meant to me, but the words felt too small. How could I put into words what he had done for me? How could I explain how much his actions had changed everything? Finally, Ayana broke the silence. His voice was low, like the rumble of thunder in the distance. "We have to move. The others will be coming." I nodded, my stomach tightening at the thought of what was to come. The soldiers were gone, but I knew that this wasn't the end. Samuel would not rest until he had me back in his grasp, until he had his revenge, and the soldiers would return sooner or later, with more men, more guns. Ayana turned his horse toward the ridge, and I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. We were on the move again, but this time, I wasn't running. I wasn't being chased. I was standing beside him, my feet planted firmly in the dust, ready to face whatever came next. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear that crept into my bones. "To the village," Ayana replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I have a plan, but we need to reach safety first." The village. The thought of it brought a strange mix of fear and hope. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I would be welcomed there or if I would be seen as an outsider, but I knew one thing. I was ready to face it. I wasn't the girl I used to be. I wasn't the girl left to die in the desert. We rode in silence, the sound of our horses' hooves the only thing breaking the stillness. As we made our way through the desert, I found myself thinking about the past, the things that had led me to this point. I had been betrayed, abandoned, used. I had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. But now, I was fighting for myself, fighting for my freedom. "Do you regret helping me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ayana glanced at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice as steady as ever. "No," he said simply. "I regret the world that made you think you had no choice, but not helping you." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket, comforting yet suffocating. He had seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. He had seen my strength, my ability to survive. I didn't know how to respond. Instead, I simply nodded. His words were more than enough. We rode for hours, the night settling in around us. The stars above were sharp and bright, their light cutting through the darkness like a promise. The desert, once a place of death, now felt like a place of possibility. Ayana finally slowed his horse as we reached the edge of a canyon. The village lay just beyond it, nestled against the rocks like a hidden sanctuary. "This is it," Ayana said, his voice low. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I tell you." I nodded again, my pulse quickening. This was it. The village, the people, the life I had been running from. But now, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready. As we approached, the sounds of the village reached us. Laughter, voices raised in song, the soft murmur of a community that had found peace in the desert. I could feel the warmth of it, even from a distance, but I could also feel the tension, the fear. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't know what I had brought with me. Ayana spoke to the guards at the entrance in their language, and they stepped aside, allowing us to pass. We rode into the village, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't being hunted. I was safe, but I knew it wouldn't last. Not forever. The soldiers would come. Samuel would come, and when they did, I would face them. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. Ayana guided me through the village, his hand resting on my shoulder. The people here were wary at first, their eyes scanning me, but there was something else there too. Something like curiosity, like they wanted to see if I was worthy of their trust. I wasn't sure if I was, but I knew that I was ready to prove it. "We will face this together," Ayana said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." And for the first time, I believed him. For the first time, I believed that I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for something bigger. The village was quieter now, the sounds of the night settling over us like a blanket. But even in this peace, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The soldiers, Samuel, the choices I had made. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if this village would welcome me, if the people here would accept me, but I did know one thing for sure. I was no longer just a girl left to die in the desert. Ayana had carried me, fought for me, saved me, and now, as I stood here in the flickering firelight, I wasn't just standing beside him. I was standing for myself, for the future that was mine to claim. I looked at Ayana, his face illuminated by the fire, his eyes steady, yet there was something in them now. Something softer, something I hadn't seen before. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was something deeper, something unspoken. "Do you think they'll come for us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ayana didn't answer right away. His gaze was distant, his thoughts far away, but when he spoke, his voice was clear, unwavering. "They'll come, but we'll be ready." I nodded, feeling the strength of his words settle over me. This wasn't over. The fight wasn't over. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had survived, and as long as Ayana was by my side, I knew I would keep surviving. He turned to me then, his eyes softening, and for the first time, I saw him not just as a warrior, but as something more. A man who had been through the worst, yet still stood tall. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice firm but gentle, and I believed him. For the first time, I truly believed him. The story of Clara and Ayana is not just a tale of survival in the unforgiving Wild West. It's a story about resilience, justice, and the strength we find in the most difficult of circumstances. Clara, abandoned in the desert, a victim of betrayal, represents the many of us who have been pushed to the edge, who have been told that we are nothing. Ayana, an Apache chief with a deep sense of honor, shows us that sometimes even the most unexpected people can change our lives for the better. Clara's journey, from a helpless victim to a woman who finds her voice and stands tall, is a powerful lesson for us all. She's been abandoned, betrayed, and left for dead, but she doesn't stay there. She doesn't let her circumstances define her. She doesn't give in to the hopelessness that could have easily consumed her. Instead, she learns to survive and in the process, finds the courage to fight for herself and what's right. How many of us have felt helpless, like we were left in the desert to die, abandoned by those who were supposed to protect us? Maybe we've been judged based on our past, or maybe we've been dismissed because of our gender, our skin color, or our background. It's easy to feel invisible, to believe that the world has forgotten us, but Clara's story reminds us that no matter how broken we feel, we have the power to choose our own path. Ayana, too, is a reminder that we are all more than the roles society assigns to us. He is a man with a troubled past, marked by war and loss, yet he chooses to fight for what's right, even when it's not easy. He could have left Clara to her fate. He could have ignored her just as others had, but he didn't. He saw her for what she truly was, not as a helpless girl, but as a person with her own strength, her own dignity. The lesson here is about making choices. In life, we are often faced with choices that define us. Sometimes, these choices are small, seemingly insignificant decisions, but sometimes they are life or death decisions, like the one Clara and Ayana had to make when the soldiers came. Clara could have chosen to stay silent, to let fear rule her, but instead, she chose to stand up for herself. Ayana could have chosen to leave her behind, to protect himself, but he didn't. He chose to fight, even when the odds were against him. It's easy to think we don't have a choice, especially when life feels like it's working against us. But the truth is, we always have a choice. Clara's story shows us that we can choose to fight, to stand up, to find our own strength, no matter how impossible the situation seems. Ayana's story shows us that even in the face of danger and betrayal, we can choose to do the right thing, to protect those who need it, even when it means putting ourselves at risk. Another powerful lesson from Clara and Ayana's journey is the importance of seeing each other for who we truly are. In a world that loves to judge based on appearances, backgrounds, and prejudices, it's easy to overlook the humanity in others, but true strength comes from seeing beyond the surface, from recognizing that everyone has a story, a struggle, and a reason for the way they are. Ayana didn't look at Clara as just a girl left to die in the desert. He saw her as someone with strength, someone who had been betrayed and abandoned, but still had the will to survive. And Clara, despite the prejudice and hatred she had been taught to fear, learned to see Ayana as more than just an enemy. She saw his honor, his sacrifice, and his loyalty. They both saw each other for who they truly were, and that recognition made all the difference. This story also speaks to the power of forgiveness. Clara could have let her hatred for Samuel consume her, but she didn't. She chose justice over vengeance. She chose to speak up and demand what was right, even when it seemed impossible. Ayana, too, could have chosen to fight for revenge, but instead, he chose to protect Clara, to offer her a chance at something better. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but it means choosing to move forward without letting the past control us. The ultimate message from this story is that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. Clara's response to her suffering, Ayana's decision to protect her, and their combined strength to stand against the injustice in front of them. All of it shows us that we are the sum of our choices, not our circumstances. So, what can we take from this story? When life knocks us down, we have a choice. We can stay down, we can let the world define us, or we can stand up and fight. When we face judgment, betrayal, and adversity, we have the power to choose how we respond. We can choose to see the humanity in others, to offer a hand when others need it, and to stand for what's right, even when it's difficult. This story isn't just a tale of survival in the Wild West. It's a story for all of us. It reminds us that we all have the power to rise, to fight, and to choose who we are, regardless of the world's expectations.